Hi, this is Angelo Bobak, the grumpy old IT guy. Yep, that's right, you heard me, the grumpy old IT guy. And welcome to my grumpy podcast, Navigating Ssms, SQL Server Management Studio. Now, this is the first podcast in the beginning TSQL podcast series. And each podcast has a demo or two, or maybe more, so pay attention, guys. And by the way, there'll be two other series of podcasts, which I hope you'll find useful and helpful. There'll be the intermediate TSQL topics and the advanced TSQL topics. Now, after taking all three series, you'll be able to perform the basic queries and development tasks associated with a TSQL developer. Okay, here comes a little grumpy comment. Now, this podcast and also the others will only cover the basics. So please look to my fall 2020 Grumpy University for in-depth courses on these topics. And oh yeah, there's a grumpy alert. Don't forget my Installing SQL Server and Tools podcasts. Okay, you're going to need these tools to do all of the examples in the other podcasts. Okay, so let's get going. Okay, by now you're probably saying, who is this grumpy old IT guy? Well, that's me. I'm a published author and data architect with over 30 years of experience in BI, data architecture, data warehousing, and data modeling. BI stands for business intelligence, by the way. Now, in the last 10 years, I've also participated in several large-scale master data and data quality initiatives. And to support these, I've achieved CIMP certification in master data and data quality. Now, I have to admit that I love the Microsoft BI stack, and I've been using SQL Server for more years than I care to mention. And then, does anyone remember SQL Server 2000, for example? And I can just hear all the grumbling and moaning out there, and all you guys are saying, wow, this guy's dating himself. Well, that's all right. And lastly, I hold a master's degree in computer science and a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering. Way back when, from Pratt Institute, when Pratt had an engineering program. And those were the days, I need to admit, I had a great time. I learned a lot and met a lot of great people. And I did a lot of goofing off too, I have to admit. Oh, and by the way, here's a little grumpy comment that I'm now the founder and president of grumpyolditguy.com. So get ready to learn the grumpy way. Okay, so what are we going to cover? Well, we'll take a quick tour of Ssms, which, by the way, stands for SQL Server Management Studio. And hopefully by now you took a look at my podcast T02, T for Tools, Installing Ssms 2019. And afterwards, you actually downloaded and installed it, all right? Now, Ssms is Microsoft's premier graphic development environment for creating databases and writing queries and managing data objects such as databases, tables, views, indexes, and a lot more. Now, we'll take a look at these features in this podcast. We'll look at the Ssms menu bar. Okay, then we'll look at Object Explorer, then the Query Pane, then the Solution Explorer pane. And at the end of this podcast, you'll be able to use Ssms to start your TSQL journey. Okay, so some of you may say, well, where do I get SQL Server? I mean, I need SQL Server first. Okay, here's a little a grumpy comment here. You might want to do this first so you can follow along. Okay, so how does one get a free copy of SQL Server, the developer license? Well, just go to the site on this clip, download the copy, and then start the install. Now, the download will take a bit of time, and so will the install itself. Now, instructions are pretty straightforward. Just accept all the defaults and load these features. Now, if you need help, you might want to look at my podcast, Grumpy Podcast T01, Installing SQL Server 2019. Okay, also check out my other tools installation podcasts, because you're going to need those tools eventually if you plan to follow all my podcasts. Okay, these will be listed at the end of the podcast. And again, the free developer license, make sure you do read the licensing terms, can be found at Microsoft.com/en-us/SQL-server/SQL-server-downloads. And as of this little recording, there's what the website looks like. So just download the developer down there where the yellow arrow is. Okay, let's take a guided tour of SQL Server Management Studio, and then the tour is free and no tickets are necessary. Now let's check out this clip. As you can see, there's 4 main windows or panels that you'll be using in your solutions and database development projects. And you can see that at a high level it's composed of 4 main components. There's the menu bar, the Object Explorer panel, the Query panel, and the Solution Explorer panel. Now the menu bar contains tools that will allow you to perform actions like execute queries, view query plans, turn on debugging, and much more. Now the Object Explorer is where you'll create and manage all your data objects. And there's facilities for viewing the object properties. And lastly, well not lastly, second to last is the Query Pane. That's where you'll write your TSQL scripts and queries, all right? A lot of your development work will be done there. And finally, there's the Solution Explorer. This is where you'll manage your TSQL project artifacts like connections, queries, and other miscellaneous topics. Now here's what SQL Server SSMS looks like when you run it. It has 4 main areas or panels. There's the menu bar, as we stated, the Object Explorer pane over there to the left. The Query Pane is not visible right now, and the Solution Explorer pane. Now let's take a peek at the menu bar and its main selection. There it is, a little blow up of the menu bar. And on there you'll see several selections. There's File, Edit, View Project, Tools, Windows, and Help, all right? And basically these will perform, the expected functions. Like with File, you can open and close and save files. Edit, you can perform editing tasks on your queries. And then Views, you can, look at various components. You can pick, if you want to see Solution Explorer or not, for example. Project, of course, will help you manage project components. Then there's various tools and window, management. You can manage how the windows appear. And then there's the good old help function. Now we'll concentrate on the basic features for now and just discuss the main window panes that make up SSMS. And again, a reminder, I'll offer a complete module on SSMS in my introductory TSQL course at my Grumpy University website this fall. So make sure you check it out. Let's take a look at Object Explorer now. Object Explorer is a very important and powerful tool. Not only can you connect to server instances like database engines or analysis services engines, as you can see there in the pop-up connect panel there in the Object Explorer, but you can also view other objects in various folders. And here's a little pop-up, or I should say an enlargement of Object Explorer. There's a folder for databases, security objects, like user IDs and managing password, server objects like other servers that you want to connect, and replication, something called Polybase, which is big data stuff, which I'm going to cover in an advanced podcast. Then there's always on high availability. I think the term speaks for itself. Then there's a folder for management where, you can perform various management functions. Then there's integration services catalogs. I'm going to have a lot to say about integration services in some future podcasts. For now, all we'll say is integration services is the premier Microsoft ETL tool, right? Very important and powerful tool to learn, especially if you want to become a Microsoft SQL Server data architect. Then there's SQL Server Agent, a folder for SQL Server Agent, which is the process scheduler. And there's an Next Event Profiler. That's an advanced topic, so I'll cover it in some other podcast. Now, for my podcast in this series, we'll be spending most of the time in the database folder, right? We want to create databases and manipulate objects like tables and views and create queries, right? So we'll just look at the basics so you can learn how to get going with this very powerful tool. Next, let's take a look at the Query Pane. It's there pretty much in most, half of the clip here, half of the SSMS window there. And this is where you'll spend most of your time. So here not only can you write TSQL queries, but also scripts that contain TSQL logic. Now TSQL, the programming language, not only lets you write SQL queries, but it'll include conditional statements and for loops to control execution of the logic. So it's very powerful. And by the way, part of the Query Pane is the output pane that shows query results and messages. And we'll see how this works in our demo. But here, let's just take a view, right? On the upper left-hand corner there, you'll see the name of the database we're connected to, Hobby Shop, right? You'll see the Object Explorer, which we just covered. So the Hobby Shop folder has been expanded, and you see all the tables. There's a couple of test tables and a product and a sales calendar and other tables. And there in the Query Pane, we have a tabbed folder. There's a query there that selects the top 1,000 rows from the calendar table. And there you see it's a fully qualified name. It's from the database Hobby Shop, from the Schema sales, and from the calendar table. And we're selecting the calendar date, calendar year, month, and day columns. And there at the bottom, you see the output, the first 1,000 rows. So by using that top 1,000 syntax, you can do a top 1,000, top 100, whatever you like, or just eliminate it entirely, all right? And you'll get all of the rows in the data. And by the way, if you right-click on that little square right above the 1 and the calendar date, right on the upper left-hand corner of the Query Pane, you can copy and paste the output of the query, for example, into a SQL Server spreadsheet. So there's a lot of neat stuff that you can do. All right, so let's just go look at the Solution Explorer next. And last but not least is the Solution Explorer pane. Now Solution Explorer, we can consider it like a container for storing project artifacts like scripts, connections, and other objects. And you can also look at the properties of the artifacts, okay? Now, what we're looking at here right now is a pretty empty Solution Explorer. We just have a container called Load Hobby Shop, and we have one connection there. That's about the only artifact there. Of course, under the Queries folder, you can add one or more queries, and then under Miscellaneous, any kind of miscellaneous object related to the project. Okay, like query scripts and a whole bunch of other stuff. So it's a good way of managing the components that make up your project. And then by right-clicking on any of the components, like if we were to right-click on the desktop connection there that's highlighted, you would get you could select a properties pane and view the properties of that connection, for example. Okay, so let's not hesitate any further, and let's go right to a demo. Let's poke around and navigate SSMS. Okay, let's bring up SQL Server Management Studio. Here it is. It's nice and empty. And we'll start off with the View selection here in the menu bar. And I want to see Object Explorer. And I want to see Solution Explorer. And I could also see a Query Pane by clicking on New Query. And that would bring up an empty Query Pane. But I'm going to get rid of this, as I'm going to bring up a couple of TSQL scripts in a project. So the way I bring up a solution, or a project, if you will, is by going Open, File Open, Project Solution. I've got a folder on my D drive under SQL Express Data called Projects. So I double click on it, and I have an organization solution. Let's double click on it. And boom, there it is. So Solution Explorer shows you this solution called Organization Solution. And it has two scripts there. Basically, it has the podcast demo script. So if I click on this, and if it'll cooperate, it'll populate a query pane with the script. Then I also have a backup. Okay, I have a backup called Navigating SSMS Backup. So it's just a backup of this script. So I always want to maintain some sort of a backup of all my scripts in case, I change something and I realize I made a mistake. But let's get rid of this backup script. And let's go look at this main script, right? So let's see, we want to play around and create a database. Now I do have a database already called Organization. I could do one of two things. I could delete this database and I can recreate it, or I can take this script and I can rename every instance of Organization, for example. So I can say, okay, let me call this Organization _ version 2. I need to do this here also because I have a organization folder and an organization file. So what I think I need to do is I need to go to my Windows Explorer here. And what I need to do is go to the D drive, the SQL Express data folder. See, I have organization here. Well, I'm going to create a new folder called Organization version 2. Okay, V2. So that's a hint. Every time you create a database, you'd like to have a dedicated folder for the database. So let me minimize this. I'm going to do this instead. Instead of manually renaming all the instances of Organization, I'm going to go to my edit. This shows you how to edit your scripts. Go to Quick Replace. There's Organization. I'm going to paste Organization and just tack on that V2 at the end. And 16 occurrences were changed. Get rid of this edit, this change and replace little pop-up. Everything looks good, but I want to verify that there's no bugs here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this little check mark. And what that does is it goes in and shows me if there's any errors. So it's telling me database organization V2 doesn't exist. Okay, so that's okay. It went to use organization _ V2, and of course it's going to give me an error because it doesn't exist yet. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the top and I'm going to create this database just by highlighting the create database statement. Now don't worry about the code right now because I'm going to produce a podcast on creating databases. So we'll go in depth into how to create a database using TSQL. So right now, just take my word for it. This create database statement has the name of the database, a couple of things called files and file groups, and how big the files are. So let's not worry about them for now, but let's just execute this statement and we'll see how long it'll take to run. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit. And we're back. It really didn't take a long time. It took 5 seconds to run, but we don't see it in Object Explorer. All right. So let's just right click on the databases folder. Let's refresh it. Okay. And there it is, organization _ V2. So it appeared. All right. So that's how to use Object Explorer. What we did is we created a database and we loaded a solution. But now let's go in and do some other things here. Let's create some tables. And what I'm going to do this time, just in the interest of of preserving some work I did before. I already have a human resources database here. So instead of using organization v2, actually I am going to use organization v2. I'm going to create a schema, which is a template basically that allows you to group related tables. I'm going to create the schema, and we're going to cover this in my podcast on table creation. I neglected to use that organization v2 command. Notice I'm in the master database. So by using use organization v2, I can switch the focus to the organization v2 database. I'm going to create a schema called human resources. I don't have to drop it because it doesn't exist. I've now got the schema created, and I'm going to create a table called department. All right, I'm going to execute this create table command. Again, don't worry about the syntax. Okay, you need to go to my, let's see, it's a third podcast on creating tables. The second podcast in this series is on creating databases. So we just created a table. Let's see if it does exist. I just expand on the tables folder, and it should show me that table. And there it is. It's in the human resources schema. Let's take a look at the columns, and there they are. And I'm now going to insert some rows into that table. Again, don't worry about the syntax for now. We'll be covering this in detail. The goal of this podcast is to show you how to navigate around SSMS, by the way, and just how to look at the different panels like Object Explorer and Query Pane and what you can do with them. So let's insert 4 rows. All right, so there's 4 rows in there. Let's execute a real simple query. We'll select all the columns from the department table and execute the query by highlighting it and click execute. And there's the simple output. Now I could have also cheated a bit. Instead of typing out that select statement, I could have just put in the word select, little tab there. I could have dragged all the column folder, and it puts all of the columns there, so big time saver. Then I'm going to add a from clause and drag the table name. So now I've got the same query. I can tack on a little batch Terminator and execute it. What else can I do? I can replace these columns with a shortcut, a wildcard. The asterisk symbol means use all the columns from the table and pretty much get the same result. So there's just a quick tour of SQL Server Management Studio. So now what do we need to do? We need to drop this database, all right? Because we don't need this V2 database anymore. And I could do it with this TSQL command, alter database organization V2 and set a single user. And then I would execute the drop database if exists below, right? But I can't do it from this session here because I'm already connected to it. So an alternate is I can right click on organization V2, click on delete. It'll bring me a nice little pane. And on the safe side, I can just click on close existing connections. I don't need to delete, backup, or restore any history information. So I'm just going to drop this database by first closing the connections. Let's just expand here, by the way, just to make sure we're in the right database. All right, so it looks good. Click on OK. Might take a few seconds, so we'll fast forward. And there it is. The database is now gone. So if I try to execute a query here, watch what's going to happen. Well, I'm going to get a error. The connection is broken and recovery is not possible. Well, that's because when I dropped the database, it broke the connection. Okay, so let me reconnect. And actually, I'm going to have to close this query down. I'm going to save it. And now I'm going to start a new query and go to connection. I'm going to change the connection to this server, and I should be okay. Now I do have an organization database, and there it is. There's all the tables. So the last thing I'm going to show you is that even with Object Explorer, you can execute a query. And there's two ways of doing that. You can right-click on Department and say select top 1,000 rows, and it'll execute and generate that query for you, and there's the results. Or I can get rid of this. Actually, let me leave it up. Let me get rid of the query. I can go back here and say generate script to table rather as a select to the clipboard. Okay, then I can right-click on this query pane and paste the query that was generated. Re-executing, and there it is. So we're in good shape. All right, so I think now you know how to navigate the menu bar a little bit. You can navigate Object Explorer, and oh yeah, one more thing, why don't I show you this? Let's right click on organization and look at the properties of the database. All right, so this is another powerful feature. You can look at some general information like the size and the date that it was created, the number of users that can connect to it. You can look at the files that make up the database. There's the logical names of the files, the file types, and then the physical location of where the files are stored. So as you can see, they're stored in that SQL Express Data Organization folder. And let me bring that folder up. All right, let's go back to Data, SQL Express Data, and under Organization, we have all of these files, all right? Let's go back here and look at Organization V2, and of course it's empty because we deleted the database. Okay, so there's how to look at properties of database objects with Object Explorer. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed the demo. We just covered the basics, and let's go wrap things up. Okay, that's it. I hope you enjoyed the demo. That's it for now. Let's cover what we learned. We did take a quick tour of SSMS, which we call stands for SQL Server Management Studio, just in case you forgot. Here's a little grumpy note, and hopefully you know how to use these tools now. And we also discussed how SSMS is Microsoft's premier graphic development environment for creating databases, writing queries, and managing data objects such as tables, views, indexes, and much more. And we also looked at the main features or components, if you will, of SSMS. Okay, there's the SSMS menu bar, right, that had all those different selections like File and Edit and View, which we covered. And then there was the Object Explorer pane and the Query Pane. And we also looked at Solution Explorer, and we wrote a few simple queries after we created a database, created a table, and populated the table with, I think it was 4 rows, okay? Anyway, so now you're ready to learn how to create a database, populate some tables, and learn how to write some queries. Okay, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this podcast, and I hope you learned the basics of navigating around SSMS. And here's a list of my other available podcasts for the category of SQL Server Tools. There's 7 of them. There's podcast T01, Installing SQL Server 2019. That's probably the most important tools podcast because you need to have SQL Server up and running to do all the exercises that we're going to cover in my podcasts. Then there's podcast T02, Installing SSMS 2019. Right, so you need to install it, and we just now covered how to navigate it in this podcast. Then there's podcast T03, Installing Data Tools 2019. This podcast shows you how to install data tools. All right, it's a extension, if you will, that gets installed into Visual Studio. So now it allows Visual Studio to create and support SQL Server related projects. And if you don't have Visual Studio 2019, the community version, That's the free version. Well, Podcast T04 is for you. It shows you how to download it and install it. Then in Podcast T05, we show you how to download and install reporting services. So this is Microsoft's complete web-based reporting architecture that complements the SQL Server architecture. So you can create reports and dashboards and basically present them to your users. Podcast T06 covers installing Report Builder. Now, Report Builder is an interesting free tool again that allows you to create these web-based reports and publish them to reporting services. And last but not least, there's Podcast T07 that shows you how to install Power BI. This is another sophisticated graphical tool that allows you to create very analytical and statistical scorecards and dashboards. So you have this entire reporting and data warehouse architecture that you can build around SQL Server. It's called a BI stack. So, wrapping it up, after installing all these tools, you'll be able to do all the demos on all of my TSQL podcasts. And you might be saying, well, what other podcasts are available? Well, let's check them out. Well, here's a list of my available podcasts for the category of TSQL Basics. There's 9 of them. There's Podcast 01, Navigating Ssms, and that's this podcast. Then Podcast 2, 3, and 4 take you through creating databases, tables, and views. Podcast 05 introduces TSQL DML, Transact SQL Data Manipulation Language, which shows you how to write sophisticated queries with joins and other features. Then there's Podcast 6 and 7, which show you how to use Microsoft SQL Server's built-in string and date functions in your queries. And finally, there's Podcast 8 and 9 that show you how to use the order by clause and the group by clause. The order by clause is used to sort the data that's returned by a query, and then the group by clause is used to return basically the data in sets or groups. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, for example, you might want to see sales by calendar date, by customer and product. So that's a set. So each time the customer and the product and the date change, you get, the different values, and you can introduce calculations like summing up the sales or showing minimum and maximum sales. So those are the 9 podcasts. I think you'll find them interesting, and I hope you take a look at them. So here's a little grumpy reminder. Be on the lookout this fall for my Grumpy University at grumpyoldit.com. I'm sorry, grumpyolditguy.com. Let's not forget the guy, because that's me, for a buffet of TSQL courses to enhance your skills. And yes, this is a shameless advertising alert. Okay, see you in Podcast 02, Creating Databases.